Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we have a very practical, a very strategic, but a very mind-blowing conversation today with Manisha Khadge. Now, Manisha, you are the current CMO at Mindbowser. You've got a staff of about 30 people on your team. One of the things when I said very practical is you make sure that you keep up to speed and you know exactly how to do the job of every single person on your team. And that's hard because with technology changes and everything, right? It's very hard to do that. But that is, I think, putting yourself into a servant leader position, but also somebody that not only knows the tactical execution, what actually can be done and what the limitations are. So therefore, when you're thinking about strategy, you know exactly what you can and how you can support. So I love this. The specific topic that we have today is CMOs, why the playbook is the new dirty word. So before we get into this, I'd love to have you maybe just expand a little bit more on your background versus what I said there.
Sure. Okay, sounds good. Hi, Steve. A pleasure to be on the podcast. Thank you for inviting me. I think you rightly described, gave a good introduction. Thank you for that. I would just add to the whole thing is that, yes, maybe I can start with my background being an army officer's daughter. Uh, my father used to get posting in different states within India. So making friends was very easy for me. I had a good communication from the beginning. I was very good in sports, which has really built my character. And then I kind of came into the professional world with a qualification with the digital, more around, uh, uh, engineering side of it. And then I started my job as developer. But I always had a question as to for whom am I building? Why am I building? I'm not talking to the person for whom I'm building something. And that's when, I kind of showed that interest to uh, my then manager. And then, he thought that I have good skills where I could talk to people and at the same time understand the technology. And that's how I moved to business development. And at that time, IT was fairly new. I'm talking about, 2003, 2004. So many years back, rather. Then I kind of realized that there are so many things I need to explore and understand and learn. And this world is, very fascinating. And that's when I started kind of, learning about different uh, practices within, business development, marketing, sales, etc. And I thought that marketing probably fits perfectly well into what, I could do or rather excel and even stand out is because it's a medium where having a good understanding, if you're in a tech world and communicating it effectively, if you can combine these two together, it really has a good impact. So understanding tech was easy because I come from tech background, and over a period of time, using my communication skill, enhancing my other skills, I kind of, thought that marketing was a perfect place for me. And thankful to many organizations, managers, and mentors and leaders who gave me the opportunity, who shaped who I am today. So yeah, more of a practitioner, as I said.
Well, let's take all that background, and I'm just going to throw the number one question at you right away here. Why is a playbook a dirty word today in marketing?
Right. Yeah. So I don't know it's dirty or not, but I personally don't, kind of like it. The reason I very strongly feel is that every company operates, within its unique ecosystem, which is shaped by its culture, number one, which I
Yeah.
feel is extremely critical because that's the foundation of an organization or religion is. And it defines whether you will succeed, not succeed, how far you will go. Every organization has their own goals, has their own team dynamics because, any organization is all about it's all about people. It's ultimately people work with people. So the team dynamics, then the market conditions and the customer expectations. So I feel the real strength of an organization lies in its ability to adapt, experiment, and grow in alignment with its unique context. And for and that's the reason I always believe that you know what works for one will not work for another, and there is a, a need for you to customize your strategies for the organization you're working on, and that's the reason I strongly feel, because uh, as you know that with digital marketing and technology, things as is overall in from marketing perspectives are evolving with such a high speed.
Yeah.
COVID happened, and the impact of COVID, uh, and the companies who were flexible, who were agile, who were ready to pivot immediately to the virtual world actually thrived and grew. Is because their foundation was built on that flexibility and agility. With trends in AI, there are so many companies who were initially doing well, but they could not, catch up, because it's all about now speed and being smart. Of course, there's always going to be a need for um, human intervention. That will never go, because your creativity and the originality always remains. But with AI, the kind of speed, the smartness which has come, you have to keep evolving. Uh, so the bottom line, as I said, that uh, it's extremely important for you to understand uniqueness of every company and accordingly work. You can use your previous experience, but don't make that as a benchmark and say, I did this over there, so I probably continue doing the same here. Yeah.
I here's my takeaway from what you're saying. Rapid technological innovation. I mean, ChatGPT is writing code now, right?
Absolutely.
I was reading an article yesterday about just the myriad of new AI companies, new MarTech companies, right? The technology sector, the SaaS sector is like just expanding so dramatically that
Right.
we have to keep up. And what worked in a playbook yesterday can't work in tomorrow necessarily, because our capabilities are different. I was just having this
Absolutely.
conversation with a Goldman Sachs value advisor, 3-time
Mhm.
B2B CMO, and she said, a year and a half ago, think about it, just from a content perspective, as marketers, what we could do versus what we can do today,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Absolutely.
just from a
Yeah.
content perspective. So I guess the bottom line here is I agree. Like, things are playing so rapidly, and our ICP, two things are always going to be true. They're complex and they're always changing. Right? So,
Right.
you know, as soon as it kind of locks us in. If we think we have a playbook, we can have some frameworks, right? We can always say, hey,
Absolutely.
we have to
Absolutely.
understand our customer. We have to have a deep understanding of our customer. That's never going to change, right? We're going to have these frameworks, but the playbook and how they're deployed in the go-to-market strategy, right? It's got to change, right?
Yes.
It's our fault if we don't change it. So I kind of agree. It's a dirty word. But here's the other thing that is an interesting part of this that I want your perspective on, is
Sure.
that um, I ask, I've interviewed over 150 C-suite executives on this podcast, and I ask them this question. And the question is, what do you think are the two biggest challenges to overcome in your business from your perspective, right? To create long-term
Mhm.
sustainable growth. You know what one of the biggest like through lines from all of that is? Almost, I would say 90% of the answers are internal challenges.
Right.
What are the two biggest challenges to creating long-term sustainable growth? And they answer with internal challenges. These are CROs, CMOs, CGOs, CEOs, right? Blew me away, absolutely blew me away. Like, you always think about our biggest challenges are, what's going on out in the marketplace, what's our competition doing and everything. So I just wanted to ask you the question, you know, executing on a go-to-market strategy, what are, in your mind, some of the biggest internal challenges to getting that done? Right? If we're not relying on the old tech, playbook, and now things are changing, and we're trying to keep up, and like that's a challenge. What do you think are some of the biggest internal challenges that we face as B2B companies today?
Well, that's a great question. And I know that there are a lot of companies who kind of, struggle with that. And uh, everyone has the same tools. Everyone reads probably the same book. And everyone is, kind of, have access to things which they really should focus on. And at first and foremost, I always say that, you will never have internal challenges if your value system is extremely strong. You know, and once you join a new organization, you might not, get a sense of you, although there are certain parameters which you kind of tick before you join, but when you join, that's when you really get the whole hang of the system and how the organization work, what's the culture, what's the value system. But I feel that using your using your experience to overcome internal challenges, the most important thing is empowering your people. That has been a success matrix which has really worked well for me. We need to, allow people to experiment quicker, feel quicker, allow them to take calls. It's not that everything kind of drives down from top to bottom.
Right.
As long as your base where your culture and value is sorted, as long as your organization goal is broken down into the last person, probably who's the least experienced, but he still knows that what kind of a contribution he plays to that, bigger goal which you have to achieve. Once they have that sense of ownership and empowerment, most of the things, get sorted. Many a times, I have personally seen is that internally people are a little lost. You are more focused on their execution and activities. And if it's a social media person, then, you set goal, which are very social media. But making that person understanding that what impact that person has, even if it's small or big, to which adds up to that bigger number which the organization is focused on. I think that really solves all the internal issues. But the most and the biggest disconnect I feel, and since I personally worked in a lot of startup ecosystem where things are moving so fast, the company is growing, there are no set processes like bigger company Microsoft and whatnot already have some processes. Here you have to build everything from scratch,
Yeah.
gradually, faster.
Yeah.
Then the empowerment, aligning to the goals, communicating with your team becomes extremely.
There's a lot especially a startup, but even today in the mid cap kind of, we're in we're always evolving and changing. So that dynamic of always changing, and if we don't manage that change well, I was just talking to a CMO CRO combination, and they went from, in the last 5 years, 15 million in annual recurring revenue to over 200 million, and on their way to 500 million. And the chief sales officer said, we're going to get there in the next 2 years. So he said, what that means is we're fundamentally a different company every year because they've
Absolutely.
gone to these different growth stages, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
everything changes, right? So a company that can't manage that change, right? And the infrastructure and the processes and the alignment and the way that we collaborate, and then I think it's why VCs and private equity companies, they invest first in people, second in the idea, because the
Absolutely.
people have to execute, right? They have to be
Absolutely.
nimble, they have to be agile, right? All right. So this
Exactly.
leads to a whole nother question because I love what you said on that first one. And that this is that inside, if we believe that we are our greatest opportunity, but we're our greatest roadblock, is kind of what we're saying here. Then, how do things like company culture and attracting the right people and building the right high performance teams, like how does that play into all of this as a factor?
Right. Yeah. So, as I said, from the word go, that the value system and the culture plays extremely key role. Even when I choose companies, work with, we're just not using it more like a buzzword, because you need to have values and you need to talk about the culture, but it actually exists and your foundation is built on the same culture. I feel it starts I there are two things which are extremely key to make sure that you're actually practicing, and your culture is really really positive in terms of helping your employees grow, so eventually your company grows. Is I feel it's trust and transparency. And this, when I say not just in internal ecosystem, but when you see in the digital and technological world and the way it is evolving, everything leaves a digital footprint. It's very
Yeah.
difficult for you to, not be caught or uh, so it's very important for you then to be extremely consistent uh, in terms of what you're talking and what you're saying. Uh, so be it when it comes to your marketing strategy, be it your social media, the kind of content you're generating, the way you're communicating to your customer, the way you're managing your employer branding, which talks about your internal dynamics, everything has to be aligned together. So, to give you an example, I always make in my previous organization, I have learned that personally, I make sure that my team has values and culture as part of their KPIs and KRS. So I'll be
Ah,
extremely,
mm,
that's a secret thing which really, because for me it matters and it needs to be, shown to the team that why it really matters. So I make sure that there's a very high weightage and that part of your KPIs and KRs from the word go and be evaluated based on the real facts that how you're shown those values. If I'm talking about openness, if I'm talking about teamwork, then every team member, has that assessing parameter where they have to show that how they showed that they were a great team player, how the openness and fairness was included in the team. So I guess it needs to become a fundamental part, and that's when people will start taking it seriously instead of just talking about values and culture and covering your employees where they're giving you great stories that I really love the culture. But then what is culture?
right.
Right? And how are you making sure that it's been thriving well and creating that positive impact? It is when it becomes foundational part of your entire system.
I love that. Like it's not part of the playbook, it's part of the foundation, right?
Right.
There's a
Absolutely.
very, very, very big difference in there. There's, another thing that we talked about before that's kind of that foundational thing, right? And that is that really deeply understanding your ICP, your ideal customer profile, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And why, in your mind, is that a foundational thing? Why is that so important?
Well, whenever I'm talking to the budding marketers, I always give them, example of that. If you might work with a small company, a mid-sized company, or a bigger company, and think like marketing is. You are a chef and you've been given a kitchen. So maybe a startup company has a smaller kitchen, and the bigger companies have bigger kitchen, fancy one. But you drive what you cook in there. And most of the people do a fundamental mistake because they want to cook what they can cook best.
Yes.
but they forget that whom are they cooking for, you know. So I might be making four great things, which I'm really good at. But if the person who's eating probably likes only one out of those four things, then I should rather focus on, making that uh, better, because ultimately I have to serve it to that person. So uh, I guess that's where the customer, profile plays extremely key role. So you may be knowing 10 things. There are various different trends going in markets. Someone will say, this is really working well and that is really working well. But what your customer wants, uh, your entire focus and strategy has to be driven uh, around the same. So I feel that the cooking example,
I love
it's something which really
it.
works, and it simplifies it. You may be
Yes.
good at
Yes.
10 things, but then you have to cook what the person's going to eat. So if that person likes a specific thing, you better focus on that versus showing your skills.
So let me ask you about maybe some different levels of understanding the ICP, because at one level, we definitely want to understand, their challenges and needs that relate specifically to what we do, our products,
Yeah.
our technologies, our services, right? However, every single company, if this is the challenges of our ICP, we help them out with this much, right? We are very focused in what we do, right? Just like somebody that comes in with a MarTech solution they're trying to sell you, that's a portion of a very, very important portion of what you need to think about and get right. But the MarTech stack doesn't define you as a CMO, right? And what you're doing. So they're addressing this where your challenges are this, right? In the way that we build trust, we build credibility, we establish ourselves as trusted advisors is knowing this, right? So having a deep understanding of your ICP around what we do for them is like level one, right? And that's where most companies live. How do you how do you understand the bigger picture? Like how do you get to, that deep, meaningful understanding about this? And that's so important, right? That drives like the thought leadership, right? You know, and I'll stop talking here in a second, but Fortune or Forbes had a great article, and the key takeaway was that content marketing solves problems, thought leadership sparks conversations, right? And in a day and age where the B2B buyer is waiting longer and longer and longer to even want to have a conversation with us, and they picked a winner who they think the winner is before they talk to any of the candidates, right? Our goal as marketers, I think, is to get that conversation started, which means we got to be able to talk to this. We can't just talk about us, right? So how do we get to
Absolutely.
this? How do we get to that understanding?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, that's another area where we keep evolving. But the fundamental, aspect over there is that ultimately people are dealing with people, right? So if you have clarity in terms of what your customer profile is, if you have clarity in terms of what is the problem you're trying to solve, and then, bring them together, but in a way where it's more like a story, the moment customer feels that you're talking something genuine, you're talking something real, versus, you're pushing it too hard and trying to show that you have a perfect solution. So I always tell my team, it's good to be talking about some real stories. Uh, People hate word called failure, and they say that, learning is a better way. There's nothing called as failure. But but I guess at the end of the day, your ICP is human, right? And it's as as far as possible, if you can try everything, be it just content or the way you're approaching. Uh, for marketing, you're going in a marketing event where you're meeting people. Before
Yes.
you meet them, the way you approach them, if you bring that human and real element into entire conversation, and that's why initially I started that transparency builds the trust. If you're transparent, if the person with whom your conversation feels that what you're talking, is coming across as real versus, the perfect
Right.
pitch, uh, you will, end up having that right conversation. So I always feel that bringing that realism, practicality, sharing your failures and, talking more about what you've learned out of them, uh, and storytelling is all about that, right? The story is never complete unless you have learnings into it. Otherwise, there's no fun in it. So I feel that bringing that transparency and the realism, uh, and not being too pushy, making sure that you're genuinely have an intent to help your customer always helps you connect with them. That's one aspect. Other thing I tell my team is, in a wide spirit, when you say that whenever you create a strategy, it's very difficult at times to narrow down your audience and you're trying to play, to your best ability and kind of focus on certain audience. And out of that, you kind of manage to capture certain. But overall, your experience of that entire audience with you should be excellent. What I mean by that if I'm talking to Steve and I'm reaching out to Steve, maybe you discover that, we are not good fit for each other. But I want Steve to feel that, I wish I could work with Manisha, although it doesn't fit. But that that aspiring to work with you is the real success of marketing, where every person feels or wants to be associated with you because
That's a good way to think. Yeah.
because you're really generating that value, even if you're not fit for them. So I always tell my team that whenever you're evaluating or communicating with customer, you always treat that customer, whether that customer falls into your eyes, it doesn't fall into your eyes, because you stand for something, and everyone needs to know, your basic value. So your communication has to be really, really impactful, where it gives that impression, where the person feels wants to be associated with you, aspires to work with you. So I think that's extremely important.
I love that. And I love how you started this whole thing out with you've got to get out there and you've got to talk to them. Like, whether it's at events, right? An industry event, an event you put together, picking up the phone, old school, pick up the phone and talk, right? And just make sure that that's an ongoing part of what you do. I think it's a lost art. And we tend to hide behind our data, right? We we
Absolutely.
we love our data, and there's nothing wrong with the data. The world is under a digital transformation, and it's so important in so many ways, but we can't use it as the proxy for the only thing we do to have a deep understanding of our ICP, right? And then we're gonna miss out there. So I've got one more question for you because we've covered a lot of territory. Okay. And here's the question. If there was one thing that you wanted people to take away from this conversation, what would that be?
I would sum up this particular conversation from where we started, that I strongly believe that practice before you preach. If you believe in that mantra, for practice, you will eventually spend time in learning, growing, because you can't practice unless you learn and keep growing, keep moving, being flexible, being adaptable. Uh, that's extremely important for your practice. Otherwise, you won't be able to practice well. So if you practice, uh, then you are a true leader who can lead by an example. And it is not about because you are practicing to maybe knowing everything so that you can manage everything. It's about that building that empathy within you, where you understand each each person's role. And as a leader, I feel leading by an example is the best way to inspire people.
Fantastic. Well, here's what I do know. People are going to have questions. So would it be okay that I gave out maybe a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out to you and, and ask questions?
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to, you know, happy to answer, of course. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, Manisha, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights and learning. And I do think that's a really great takeaway is be a practitioner, not just a strategist, right? Because there's a lot to learn from doing. I had one of my own team members who's really a really bright young man, about 40. No, that's not right. 20, maybe 8 years or so younger than I am right now, 40. But I listened to him yesterday talk about how he thought about things that we were doing and how we were creating content. And he had so many great ideas that I've got an hour and a half meeting scheduled just between him and I, right? Because like what he was doing was fantastic. And by doing, you ideate too, right? And so that learning is just one of my big takeaways from our conversation today is we've got to be doing as much as thinking and strategizing. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Strategies are only good if you can execute them. And for execution, you need practice.
There you go. That's a good way to
Yeah.
end it. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you.